We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. On the phone, Ezra Klein from the Washington Post. Thanks for joining us, Ezra.
Thank you.
Assume you're pretty tan.
Sorry?
I assume you're pretty tan right now.
A little bit. Florida was warmer than Washington, but not quite as warm as you might think.
Did you run into Chris Christie down there?
I did not. We must have missed it. I mean, unfortunately, unlike Governor Christie, I was actually working from Florida, so I spent most of my time inside writing about American politics. I didn't get to go to Disney World.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but maybe
Yeah, me too.
maybe if there's some type of hurricane that hits New Jersey, he'll take you.
Well, it seems good being a government worker sometimes.
Yes. Wasn't he also the guy? He also, as a U.S. attorney, he spent a lot of time at like the Ritz-Carlton, if I remember correctly.
That I don't know about.
But all right, well, listen. I want to talk to you basically about the filibuster, and I have warned my audience that this could get pretty weedy and wonky here. So don't hold
weedy and wonky.
Weedy and wonky. I mean, it's Wednesday. It's in the middle of everybody's vacation, so this is a great time to do it.
All right.
So, all right. Well, first, let's just outline what it is that is being proposed. There were let's just say all the returning Democratic senators, and including a couple that weren't. Everyone essentially, except for Chris Dodd, signed a letter to Harry Reid asking him to reform the rules around the filibuster. Just give us a quick breakdown of what they're proposing.
Nothing. They are proposing nothing. They signed a letter to Harry Reid saying you should, in some way that we are not going to define, reform the filibuster. And the reason they did that is that there is a belief and an understanding that the practice has been increasingly abused, and it really, really has, in ways that are completely ahistorical. And we can talk about that later. But they signed the letter to give him essentially negotiating power. So he can go to Mitch McConnell. He can say, look, I got 53 Democrats. I got more than a majority of Democrats here ready to reform this thing if you guys don't back off a bit. So I think the likeliest thing to expect is this is, broadly speaking, a warning shot. Democrats will make some small changes to it. Maybe, when you vote to break a filibuster, it's something called cloture, and you need to essentially take a couple of days to do that. Maybe they'll make that period shorter. There'll be very, very small changes, if any are made at all. But what Democrats are saying is, if you guys keep doing this, we're going to reform this thing. We're going to, if not get rid of it, change it pretty dramatically. I don't think they're going to do it this session, but they are saying this is not a sacrosanct principle. We can reform it. It's been reformed before, and if you guys keep doing this, we're going to do it again.
All right. So now there are a lot of people out there advocating for some real changes, and the plan that's being floated around is that the time to do this would be on the opening day of the Senate, I guess on January 5th of 2011. Some of the proposals that I've seen floated around have to do with which part of the process, as a bill sort of makes its way to the floor, you can attempt to filibuster, and just how sort of anonymously you can do it. There's some requirements that after 10 hours there needs to be 20 people on the floor, after 30 hours,
right,
so on like that, and then another transparency issue in terms of these holds.
So the problem with the filibuster, and the reason these conversations get weedy, is you have to ask yourself which problem you're actually solving. So the main thing the filibuster is doing right now is creating an effective 60-vote hurdle for anything in the Senate to get done. None of these reforms do anything about that, and that's an important point. They don't bring it down to 57 or 55, much less 51. The filibuster remains a 60-vote supermajority requirement in the U.S. Senate, which is not how the place was designed to work, and is not how it's worked really at any previous time in the nation's history. So put that aside for a minute. Then there's a second series of problems. One problem is that breaking a filibuster takes a lot of time. So on something like healthcare reform, where it's a really big deal, it's okay to take a couple weeks to do that. That is how you run the Senate. But on something like a judicial nomination or a food safety bill, those are not as big issues. And so the prospect of having to take a week or even more than a week of very, very valuable, very precious floor time to break a filibuster being mounted by 2 guys or 10 guys or even, just the Republican Party as a whole, even if you have the votes to break it, it may not be worth it. So a lot of things simply slip off the calendar because what the filibuster does is, essentially throw molasses on the U.S. Senate. This doesn't really do anything about that either. What it does do something about is that the filibuster currently is not what we think of when we think of a filibuster. It doesn't require anybody to sit on the floor of the Senate and talk. So you're not dealing with the type of filibuster where you're essentially running an endurance test. If the Republicans want to filibuster something, they pretty much just tell Harry Reid, we're going to do it, and Harry Reid decides if he's got the votes or not, and if he doesn't bring the thing up, and if he does, he tries to move it and decides if he's willing to risk the time. What the Merkley reforms would do, which is one of the options on the table for this, and probably the one I think you're talking about, is that it would make it much more physically costly on the Republicans to filibuster. So they would have to be eventually 20 of them on the floor at all times, and they would have to be talking continuously. And essentially, if Harry Reid wanted it to be so, all day and all night. So they'd have to decide, how much is this worth to me? Do I really care about killing this judicial nominee who frankly isn't that controversial in the first place? Maybe they do, but maybe they all want to go home for Christmas, or maybe they all want to go home at the end of the day. And as we saw in the lame duck, when people want to go home for Christmas or they want to go home at the end of the day, suddenly obstruction doesn't look as good as it did before. Right. So you're solving one of the problems here, but I do want to be clear, and I think it's important. It isn't any of the main two.
Now, I spoke to Senator Tom Udall the other night on Countdown, and also accidentally called him Udall, which is just a side note. But he's been talking about the constitutional option, and if my understanding is correct, what this means is essentially they would bring in, they would attempt to change the rules. My understanding is that you can change the rules with 51 votes in the Senate, but that the question is, can you break essentially a filibuster of that vote with less than 2/3? Is that right?
Yeah, right. So you can't filibuster, this constitutional option idea, and here's the reason. By the way, there's an argument that you could just change the rules at any time with 51, but we can put that aside for a minute. You can't filibuster what happens at the beginning of a session for this reason. At the beginning of a session, there are no rules. So every Congress, in the Constitution it says, every Congress or both chambers, or whatever the wording is, will be able to make their own rules. And that means that each new Congress has to be able to make its own rules, right? The fact that in 1952 the Congress had these rules, that can't affect the Congress of 2010, because that would mean that the 112th Congress doesn't have the capacity to make its own rules. So when you come in, essentially what happens is you agree to adopt the rules of the previous Congress. But you don't have to do that. And if you're not doing that, then the only rules that are really operative are those that are in the Constitution. And the Constitution has nothing about a filibuster. It says, you can't do treaties and you can't do impeachment with less than 2/3, and it says that you can't overturn the president's veto with less than 2/3. But it does not say that you cannot run your votes in a majority rules environment. That was what the Senate was intended to do. And so unless the rule book is readopted, the Senate doesn't work that way. So when the rule book does get readopted, it's a majority vote, and Democrats could simply vote to change the rule book.
Yeah. Now there's two issues with this. One, the letter that Reid has in his pocket now as a negotiation tool becomes a lot less effective once the rules are adopted and the reforms to the filibuster have not been addressed. Isn't that right?
Right.
Okay. Now, two, my understanding is that there's also a concept that has essentially prevented the type of rules change that we're sort of discussing here, that the Senate, as opposed to the House, is a sort of continuing body. Because only 1/3 of the Senate, everyone knows that the House, all of its members are up for re-election every 2 years. It's essentially a new body every 2 years. The Senate, on the other hand, only 1/3 of its members are up in any given election, more or less. And that there is a concept, or at least a Senate tradition, that this is a continuous body, and that it would be rather precedent-setting to do what some people are talking about, either getting rid of the filibuster or reforming it in this way. Address that, because I know that when we were talking about the nuclear option back when Bill Frist was threatening it so that judges couldn't be filibustered, there was a whole question about the vice president coming in as the president of the Senate, and maybe it was because it was 50-51 at that time, but essentially ruling on the constitutionality or asking the parliamentarian to rule on the rules, and then basically saying, hey, if you didn't like his rules, like, go take a powder for a minute.
And that's exactly the point right there. So there is the continuous body theory, but it's exactly that. It is an abstract theory. It is one way of understanding the way the Senate usually works, because the Senate usually doesn't make a huge deal out of bringing in the rules, and you can say they don't even do anything. They just sort of, they quietly accept them. So they're continuing. They're not making any decisions. But we have done, rule changes have happened again and again, sometimes with this sort of constitutional option framework. That's happened before with the filibuster. Remember, before 1975, to take out a filibuster, you needed 2/3 of the Senate, not 3/5. They changed it. Before 1917, you couldn't end a filibuster at all. It simply wasn't in the rules anywhere that you could get rid of unlimited debate. They changed that. So rule changes do happen, and as the nuclear option, which was a much more aggressive version of this theory, sort of showed, if the majority has has both sort of the presidency of the Senate with the vice president and the will to do this, they can sort of do whatever they want. They can really, and that's what was my point earlier, that you don't even really need to do it at the start of a session. The reason the constitutional option gets pushed is because on some level, I believe, it strikes people as more fair. You're not changing the rules in the middle of the game. You're changing them and making it clear before the game. Tom or Senator Udall makes the argument, I think it's very, very persuasive, that it would be a good thing for the Senate in a general sense not to just think of the constitutional option as something it should do this year because, the filibuster has gotten out of hand, but something it should be doing continuously. Every 2 years, you should be looking at the rules again. And the reason he says that is that it brings accountability to the way people use the rules. If you have a rule book that never gets changed at all, people basically are just sitting around all day trying to figure out how to game it, trying to reinterpret parliamentary procedures in order to get their ends done. That isn't how rules should work, right? Rules aren't weapons. They're supposed to be a pretty clear framework under which ordinary business can take place effectively. So if every 2 years people are looking at these rules and saying, well, are these working for us now, that it would bring back some of those norms of being careful with how you use the rules, because you understand if you misuse them, the majority can take them away from you. But so more directly to your question, I'm not too worried about the continuous body thing, because basically, the power exists for the majority to do what they would like to do.
But okay. Now, there's 2 points here. Now, let's leave aside the question of sort of some notion of fairness and small d democracy in the Senate. Okay, let's leave that aside for a second. Let's talk about this politically, because you mentioned that the filibuster threshold went from 67 to 60. With Senator Byrd back in the 70s, and in 1917 was the imposition of a way to break a filibuster. But my understanding is that at these times, these were negotiated changes in the rules. That in fact it didn't ultimately come down to a showdown, as it were. That it was in fact a negotiated, almost bipartisan change in the rules. And I guess what I'm concerned with, because there's two, and I'm talking now from a political sense. Again, putting aside the idea of the Senate should be a more democratic body, we can have that debate too. But what I'm concerned with is that I'm not clear on what political benefit we can get from a democratic perspective with any of these rule changes, whatever it was. If the filibusters drop to 55, I'm not convinced that there's a benefit for Democrats. And B, my concern is that if this is a fundamental change in the rules, if we were to adopt that perspective that Merkley has, that every 2 years the rules can be rewritten, what is to prevent the Republicans from coming in 2012? They control the Senate. It's, at least statistically, it's likely to happen, but who knows what can happen in 2 years. What is to prevent the Republicans from coming in and saying, hey, those rules that the House passed this year on cut-go, where only taxes can be dropped and anything else, any other expenditures must be paid for by other cuts. We're going to impose the same thing. What's to prevent them from doing that?
Well, number one, I would expect they would do that one way or the other. The PAYGO thing comes in and out of the Senate. Remember, Republicans got rid of PAYGO when they controlled the Senate in the aughts. So that's been a more sort of, or a less negotiated rule change in general. But your broader point here is, of course, right. Nothing will prevent a determined Republican majority, as they almost did with the judicial filibuster, from changing the rules. And you have to ask yourself if you're okay with that. My answer is that I am. My broad point on the filibuster, the reason I don't like it fundamentally, is that I think that the problems we face as a country going forward are on autopilot and the solutions are not. That rising healthcare costs and crumbling infrastructure and global warming and all these things, if we do nothing, they will continue to get worse and worse and worse and potentially consume us. But if you want to do something about them, what you have to ask yourself is, should it be easier or harder to take action legislatively? And I think we need to make it easier. Now, so what people say is, well, if the Republicans come in and they say, look, Democrats have already started taking out the filibuster, we'll just finish this off, and we and President Mitt Romney or whoever it might be will just do whatever we want. I think you got to say on some level, fine. If they decide to do that and they decide to pass a bunch of legislation, then the way things are supposed to work in this country is that the American people will judge that, decide if they like it, and either return them to power or not. I'm a big fan of the health care reform bill, as I think you know. And so some of my readers will say to me, if you get rid of the filibuster and Republicans sweep in 2012, doesn't that make it much easier to repeal health care reform? And my answer to them always is absolutely. And that if, frankly, after passing health care reform, so much as I might like it, if Republicans win 2 straight elections at a very, very high level and the bill remains unpopular, legislation it's not the Ten Commandments. This stuff has to be undoable, and at some level we do have to sort of respect the democratic nature of the country. So I'm much more comfortable with a political system in which the way we are judging the parties is that they ran on an agenda, they achieved that agenda, and we decide if we like it, rather than they ran on agenda, achieved nothing. Nobody really understood why Washington didn't work for them, and now there's a sort of a question in the country of why these people aren't working on their behalf. I think that the clear lines of accountability you need to make a democracy work effectively have been broken down by the level of minority obstruction on both sides, by the way, in the Senate. And getting rid of that would lead to a better country, even if it means that there would be things that the Republican Party, or for that matter the Democratic Party, would do that I might not like.
Okay, well, there's 3 points here. One is the inevitability of Republicans changing it anyways, and it's very hard to predict these things. My concern with doing anything that's precedent setting, which it seems to me that it would be on some level if it's not negotiated, is that the Republicans have a certain I was using this analogy yesterday, where the Republicans have a certain capacity. If you think about it as a horse race, they have a capacity to jump 4 feet. Their horse can go over a horse jump of 4 feet, whereas the Democrats are probably around 2 feet. And that if we set a precedent here, we're lowering their ability to change from 5 feet, a 5-foot jump, down to a 3.5-foot jump. So their capacity hasn't increased, but the threshold has dropped enough so that they can get through it. Now, if I hear you correctly, that's sort of irrelevant in the argument you're making. The argument you're making is, let the Republicans, if it's their will to come in and do this, and the American public supports their doing this, then let the chips fall where they may. That's what democracy is about. Is that accurate?
I think that's right. I'm slightly confused by the horse jumping analogy, but the only thing I would add is that I think the best thing for both parties, and I've made this argument many times before, but nobody in the Senate listens to me, would be for essentially the 2 parties to get together and create a package of rule changes that would take effect in 6 years, which would mean both parties have to think simultaneously as potential minorities and potential majorities.
Right. That's a great idea, of course, but
broadly speaking, I think you're right.
They can't agree on anything else, but right. I guess my concern is in what you're suggesting is that there's 2 things. One, the Senate wasn't necessarily built. I mean, I think the level of dysfunction in the Senate has reached an all-time high, but on some level, your own argument would support that it should, because they keep electing Republicans who are obstructing in this instance. I mean, the Senate was, the Senate when it was first established was actually appointed by state legislatures.
Here's what I always think when I say that, when I hear this argument, because it makes perfect sense, right? The idea that the American people want obstruction, and I would sort of suggest that I don't really see the case for it. When the Pew did a poll recently, and they said, how many how many people know what the filibuster essentially is? 25% of people knew that you needed 60 votes to end a filibuster. 25% thought you needed 51%, and another 50% didn't know.
Right.
So I think it's really important to put this clearly. Most Americans not only do not pay attention to politics, really, but really don't pay attention to congressional procedure. So they look over and they basically see nothing happen, and what does happen takes forever, and it's incredibly bitter and partisan, and it just looks awful to them. And they don't really totally see why that's happening. I mean, they're not sitting here, reading CRS reports on institutional rule changes in the Senate. And so they sort of are continually throwing out the other party, right? We've had, after about 40 years of stability in the House during, from about the 60s to the 90s, or 50s to the 90s, you have had three or certainly a number of changes back and forth in the House, and similarly the Senate has been changing hands very rapidly. And you've entered, I think, a period of essentially disequilibrium in American elections. And I think part of the reason, not the only reason, but part of the reason is the filibuster that the two parties have recognized, and this wasn't something they used to do, that the quickest way back to power is to make the majority party into a failure. And the way you do that is you keep them from governing. So you keep them from governing, and that's you doing it. But the American people look and they say, these guys aren't governing. I mean, it's just crap what's happening up there. And, we're going to throw them out and get the other guys in. And I don't think that's a healthy way for democracy to work.
But aren't you concerned that I mean, frankly, I don't know how much people follow politics, regardless of whether it's procedure or not. I mean, we're looking at you could go around and ask people about Cutgo, and they would, or even Paygo, and they would assume you're talking about some Indonesian country or something. It wouldn't mean anything. And I guess my concern with this is just that from a I appreciate the fact that you're looking at it from a procedural standpoint. I'm just, I look at what happened with the lame duck session, and what I see there was when the Democrats can work the politics as a majority, they can get things done. To the extent that other things are not happening, it's a failure of politics, or it's a failure for us to understand what their agendas are.
I think that's a common take on the lame duck, but I think I'd say I disagree with it, and here's how I'd respin it, or here's how I'd reframe it. When I look at the lame duck, what I see was this. There were a series of bills. The tax deal obviously was negotiated right before the lame duck and was sort of a different case, so we'll put that aside just for a moment. START, the food safety bill, the DADT, these were a series of bills that in every case, and that was really important, most of them needed unanimous consent, although not all of them. In every case, they had some level of pre-existing Republican support. And these were bills that had been around for a long time in the 111th Congress, but they hadn't been passed. And here, to me, is the reason why. Before the election, Republicans had a very strong incentive to not give the Democrats any victories at all. Now, that was true even if they thought the food safety bill, for instance, or Don't Ask, Don't Tell was the right thing to do for the country. That above that priority was the priority that the country, to put it in the most virtuous possible way, the country would be better off if we were in charge because we have better ideas for the country. So even if DADT repeal is a good thing, it's a better thing to basically make sure Democrats don't look like they're being able to govern the country, and we'll stop them from doing that. Then lame duck happens, and now you don't have an election imminent. Particularly, you don't have an election imminent with the same people from this Congress. And a lot of these Republicans, I think, who knew this legislation was good legislation, wanted to get it done still and weren't sure they'd actually be able to get it done given the radicalism of the incoming Republican Congress. So I know it's a lot of my progressive friends have made the argument that what happened in lame duck is Democrats got way better at messaging. And I don't really see the evidence for that. What seems to me to have happened in lame duck is that there were things that needed to get done, Republicans who wanted to do them, and Harry Reid is pretty good at saying he's going to keep the Senate in session longer than people wanted to, so a bunch of stuff slipped through. But I actually think it's evidence for my point that given the current incentives in the system, the two parties choose making each other into failures over governing for the good of the nation, and that the reason they're able to make that choice, the only reason it is an effective strategy, is because of the filibuster and sort of assorted similar types of obstructions in the Senate. And so if you take that away, that I actually believe, and this is a bit of a counterintuitive argument, but I think it's true, that bipartisanship on bills would increase, because when simply saying no isn't the best thing to do. It doesn't work because the other guys don't fail. They just succeed and you weren't part of it. It's not a very good political strategy. When the START treaty ended up passing, there was an interesting thing that happened where a treaty that barely looked like it was going to get 67 ended up getting many more than that. And the reason that happened is that for Republicans or for the minority in general, the best thing to do may be to block something from happening, but the second best thing to do may not be to vote no, particularly if it's fairly popular. So I would push you to think of the lame duck a little bit like that, which is that it is what happens when the basic incentive that the filibuster creates is for a brief moment lifted.
And finally, what about judges? I mean, my other concern is that in 2012, the Republicans take over the Senate. Let's say it is President Romney or President Thune, and Democrats don't have an ability to filibuster judges.
This sounds a little bit cavalier, but you've got to win elections. And it's true that when a Republican wins and there's a Republican Senate with them, they will be able to get in a lot of fairly extreme judges. On the other hand, they were able to do that last time too. As you remember, the attempt to take basically the compromise was that, okay, we'll just stop filibustering your judges.
Exactly.
And on the other hand, Barack Obama has had a ton of his judges, people like Goodwin Liu, held up. So again, the way I'd put it is that you'll see something of a parity of the two parties, and if you believe that your ideas are stronger and are going to be more popular, and your party is going to be stronger and more popular than the other party, it's a change you should welcome, because basically the way it might work, or the way it, in theory it should work, is that you'll get to do the stuff you said we're going to do. People will like it, and they'll keep electing you. One thing you made the point earlier that you made the point earlier that it can go both ways, saying that the public doesn't know congressional arcana. But I think the thing to think about of a filibuster-less 111th Congress, aside from things like the public option, which would be in the bill and that sort of thing, is there would have been a lot more stimulus. I mean, the House passed hundreds of billions of dollars more stimulus than the Senate did, and that money would have been out of the economy helping people, and it may very well have moderated the Democrats' electoral losses, because at the end of the day, the economy is what people vote on. So I mean, that capacity to show people that your ideas work and the other guy's ideas don't is, I think, really should be the central. Should be everybody on both sides of the divide should be confident about it. And if you're not confident about it, you should ask yourself why you're on the team that you're on.
I mean, I guess, my sense of the stimulus may also have to do with my sense of the stimulus is that if you had dropped the threshold for a filibuster to 55, there would have been senators with recalibrated where they stood on the whole thing so that they could still be the fulcrum. I think Joe Lieberman was a perfect example of that when it came to the buy-in to Medicare, where the guy championed that position, and when he realized, like, this is going to put him a little bit on one side of that fulcrum, he's still not going to be the guy, that he shifted his position so that he could be that guy again.
Sure.
But I guess I'm a little concerned about the idea of the protecting the minority from the tyranny of the majority to some extent if we lose that entire capacity. But I don't know.
Well, the point I'd make on Lieberman and the filibuster is that he was able to do that because he needed 60. If you needed 51, you'd have had 9 votes to play with there and better deals you could have cut. As for the question of stimulus and you see a drop in Senate support for that, again, I think the strongest incentives nowadays are party incentives, right? Almost everything depends on, you can predict pretty much any vote by looking at party. And if you have a situation in which you have the stimulus money coming through and Democrats know it'd be good for them to pass and Republicans know it'd be bad, you got 60 Democrats. Yeah, Ben Nelson may take a walk because finally Ben Nelson is able to take a walk and you don't need him, but most of your people are going to be there for you on that vote, and it's what you see in the House. I mean, that is how it works, and you can just see in the level of legislation the House is able to pass versus the Senate, how much people do sort of stick together on these party votes. As for the tyranny of the majority and the minority, it's completely fair enough, but I do think I would put it this way. Britain and Canada and the Netherlands and all these other countries, they work on majority vote rules. And when we do elections, they work on majority vote rules. And for most of our history, the Senate and the House worked on majority vote rules. There's this great paper that Lyndon Johnson's Senate head, his Senate liaison, sent him, where he said, after the '64 election, we got 55 votes, so we can pass Medicare. You'd never say that today, but that's how things worked back then. You could have passed Medicare with 55 votes. It was a pretty big bill. So a world where you have majority voting rules, I think we get sort of weirdly concerned about it at this point, because we've got a bit of a bias towards the status quo in the Senate. But as I said earlier, I think the real dangers in the sort of coming decades are not that we will do too much on our pressing problems, but that we will do too little. And if you believe that, and again, as I do, then you have to say the Senate is or the filibuster is part of what will make us do too little. So I worry less about the tyranny of the majority than I do about the impotence of the majority, and particularly the impotence of our legislative system going forward.
Well, Ezra Klein of the Washington Post, I appreciate your time. I hope that when the Republicans get in, they will heed your call to do some stuff about our infrastructure, about our.
Sure.
I'm not terribly hopeful, but I appreciate your indulging us, which I think is probably one of it's got to have been one of the weediest. I think definitely in this week's podcast that are floating out there, this one is going to be the weediest on the filibuster. And,
I get weird twice before breakfast.
Oh, gosh. All right, Ezra Klein, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.